Well, it's $865 billion is the total tort costs on the U.S. economy that we calculated from after doing about 8 months of research. The most commonly cited number comes from a study from the Tillinghast Company, and their figure is about $279 billion in 2006 dollars. So ours is over 3 times as high as the current gold standard in terms of measuring tort costs. And the reason for that is that our study looks at a lot of factors that the Tillinghast study didn't look at. To be fair, they set out not to measure these things. I mean, they wanted to look at just U.S. direct tort costs, the costs for attorneys, the costs for actual payouts, for settlements and judgments, the costs for insurance administrative expenses, things like that. So they look at just the direct tort costs alone. And they do a really good job at it. But we wanted to also look at what are all the indirect costs that are imposed on the economy from the tort liability system. So that's why our number is so much higher. The approach that we took is we compared the U.S. tort liability costs to other industrialized countries around the world to try to get a measure of how much more expensive the tort liability system is in the U.S. rather than other industrialized countries that have, generally a comparable level of per capita income and generally a comparable level of economic activity and that sort of thing. So it turns out that after we crunched the numbers and made the comparison, we estimated about 59% of all tort costs in the U.S. are excessive. They're unnecessary. They're completely wasteful. That's every single year that we're seeing that kind of drag on the economy that increases, the cost to do business in the U.S. It's going to drive plants and operations overseas to try to escape that cost. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot more manufacturing, especially move overseas, because they can find a much more friendly tort climate in which to operate. The litigation environment, I think, is a huge factor in terms of deciding how businessmen decide where to locate to, where to set up shop, where to open a new plant, where to expand. You can keep a plant here and it looks like it's still here. But what people don't think about is that maybe the company just a few months ago decided to expand, but they chose not to expand there. So it's the same plant, the same size, but they opened up another plant at a bigger size, bigger operation in India or China. So I think over time you're going to see a lot more shifting of resources and operations overseas. And a big factor motivating that is the tort liability system. As I said, if we're paying 59% more in terms of tort costs in other countries, you can save a whole lot of money and become much more internationally competitive by avoiding that cost and moving overseas. One of the things that we looked at was how much do sales today, how much lower are sales today due to reduced innovation from the past. Businesses aren't spending as much on R&D because they have to take those resources and fight lawsuits, for example. So that reduces innovation, that reduces R&D expenditures, that reduces new products that are introduced onto the market. And that alone, we estimate, costs about $367 billion a year, and fewer products that are introduced into the market that consumers could be buying today that could be life-saving products in some cases, pharmaceuticals or new medical devices that could be saving lives that aren't making it into the market because businesses are using those resources instead of on R&D to produce new products. They're using it to fight lawsuits, defend themselves, and it's a decision that they have to make in order to survive, but they'd much rather spend it into new life-saving products like that. Consumers are paying a huge price for this, from lack of innovation and lack of jobs that are not being produced because of the costs of the U.S. tort liability system. And so the people who are making money off of it are all the middlemen that feed off the system. I mean, it's the lawyers, it's in some cases, doctors and hospital systems that are getting more payment for tests and procedures that aren't necessary. But it's mainly, the legal profession. So that can be conceived as basically a tort tax. That's what we call it. I mean, it's a tort tax of about $10,000 per family of four to pay for tort costs and also for the foregone benefits of the products that aren't produced, the lack of new products that are being introduced onto the market. So it's about $10,000 a year that each family gets hit with due to excessive tort liability in this country. And another way to look at it is about the size of the U.S. restaurant industry. So that's about the size. So if you picture all the fast foods, all the glamorous restaurants, put them all together for 1 year, that's the output of the U.S. restaurant industry is about the same size, equivalent size of the U.S. tort liability system in the United States. So it's a huge amount of money. It's a huge enterprise. The lawsuit industry has just grown exponentially, and it's a huge drag on the economy because those resources that could be spent in other more beneficial, more productive ways are instead spent fighting lawsuits and reorganizing your business in order to avoid lawsuits and hiring attorneys that are going to help you defend yourself rather than being put into new product development. Tests are being ordered at hospitals and at clinics that aren't necessary, driving up the health insurance premiums that the small business owner is going to have to pay. And also it means that oftentimes if they can't, for example, if they can't offer health insurance to their employees, those employees are more likely to get sick more often. They're going to come to work with ailments. They're not going to be as productive at work as they would have been. So it also drives less productivity in the economy than we would have had too. So the small businessman is going to be hurt both ways. I mean, they're going to get, if they can afford to provide health insurance to their employees, the cost is going to be greater. And if they can't, it's likely oftentimes because of all these extra tests and things that are being ordered that aren't necessary that's driving up the cost of health insurance. That adds another $40 billion to the cost of the tort liability system just in terms of all of these productivity effects that reduced access to health care has. So we have the $124 billion of the initial increase in expenditures that are unnecessary, defensive medicine costs. But you can also add on to that another $40 billion due to lower productivity from workers that can't get access to health care because of the rise in health care costs from the defensive medicine. I think it's important to note that the President's Council of Economic Advisors just 4 years ago now did a major study on the effect of the tort liability system on the U.S. economy. So if the top economists in the country have now noticed this as being a huge problem, I think it is a huge problem. And it's important that everybody realize that it is such and that we need to focus on solving it, or the U.S. economy is not going to ever reach its full productive potential. I mean, it's doing well the last few years. I mean, it's good growth rate, 3.5%, which is not bad. But just think of what we're giving up in terms of new investments, new growth, new jobs. It's something that most people can't see, so they don't think it's real because they see the growth rate, 3.5%. Well, that's good. That's historically about average, that sort of thing. But what people don't see is what we're giving up. We're giving up a huge amount of productivity and greater economic potential than we're actually realizing because of this drag on the economy.